Back in 2014, there was a suicide bombing in a marketplace in northern Iraq that killed 4. But the interesting thing about this was that the suicide bomber was Australian, or should that be in quotation marks? It turns out he was the second quotation mark Australian suicide bomber. Some report he was the third. Now I ask you, what kind of Australian name is Abu Bakr al-Australi? We all know it's not an Australian name, it's an Arabic name, a fake Arabic name at that. 2 of the suicide bombers have used this alias before carrying out their evil actions. The media were happy to call them Australian, but now I ask you a second question. What makes an Australian think of going on jihad and then deciding to become a suicide bomber? The answer is Islam, and particularly its political offshoot, Islamism. What does Islam have to do with Australia? Until 1967, the answer was very little. In the late 1800s, the first Muslims came to Australia as camel drivers. They lived very tough lives, running caravans out into the centre of Australia, which is mostly desert. They were always called Afghans, but most would have come from what's now Pakistan, and nearly all were men, about 1,000. When they married, it was mostly to white Australian women who converted to Islam, and in time they grew to a few thousand spread around Australia. The only real trouble they caused was in 1914 when we went to war against the Ottoman Empire. 2 shot up a trainload of picnickers, killing 1 man. But apart from that, I haven't heard of any other serious problems, and over time their numbers fell. All that changed in 1967. In 1967, the Australian government decided to extend our immigration program to Turkey, and that began the influx of Muslims into Australia. In the 1970s, immigration was extended to every country in the world, but what really started increasing the numbers was the civil war in Lebanon. From here, the numbers grew slowly until the 1990s, when large numbers of Muslims started to enter Australia. And how have we been repaid? Just like in many other Western countries, Islamic terrorist cells have been arrested for plotting mass murder upon us. Others are under monitoring from our intelligence service, and our military, police and emergency services train for what they will do if one of these plots isn't discovered in time. Now, we keep hearing about how worried the politicians and our intelligence chiefs are worried that jihadists who have trained and fought in Syria and or Iraq should return and want to continue the fight. We have been luckier than some in that we have not had a successful terrorist attack within Australia, but unluckier than others, as 88 Australians were killed in a terrorist attack in Bali, and others have been killed in other places. Now, some argue that there's only a tiny minority, and they are correct. They argue that most Muslims are just normal people seeking to get on with their life, and again, they are correct. But that doesn't change the fact that the Australian government imported a problem that we didn't have, and I might add, didn't need. Again, you might argue that the government cannot predict the future, to which I wholeheartedly agree. This leads us to 2 points. Firstly, that's an argument for a more cautious approach. And secondly, while the government may not be able to predict the future, it certainly can understand the past, and to a lesser extent, the present. But Islamic immigration into Australia has not stopped, nor has it decreased. No, it continues unabated. It seems with no end in sight. At the same time, we know that the war against Islamism has not ended, and that means we must constantly watch over our shoulders to make sure we are safe. Our own government, Labor and Liberal, have made us less safe, less secure, and have destroyed our peace of mind. And for what?